What is something about yourself that sounds totally made up but is 100% real? I was once sponsored by the Crunk Energy Drink Company for sailing. I imagine I was the only sailor on their list. I literally just emailed them saying that I sailed and asked if they wanted me to put stickers on my boat. They sent me a few cases of the drink, t-shirts, hats, the works. My car was known as the Crunk Mobile. I never graduated high school, but I have a bachelor's degree. I was homeschooled and my mom never went through the legal steps to actually get me a real diploma, so she made one in Photoshop that was then used to get me into this podunk community college that didn't verify it. From there I got my associate's degree, which I then used to get into a decent university where I got my bachelor's. I died first, and then was born. I've told this story a few times on Reddit, but I enjoy telling it, so here we go again. During the cesarean to bring me into the world, there was some major complication on my mother's end. She started bleeding internally, drowning me in the womb. When I was removed, the doctors tried to get me breathing but couldn't. I was declared dead. My mother was still unconscious, but my dad was brought in to say goodbye to me. He held me in his arms, was saying goodbye when out of nowhere I started coughing up blood and screaming as babies do. Apparently it was the weirdest moment in his life, being abjectly terrified and overwhelmed with joy that I was alive. It's my favorite story to tell, because weirdly it takes some pressures off on birthdays. I don't do well with too much attention by family friends, but celebrating my death day doesn't bring people the same connotations. My great-grandfather worked in the textile business and started importing rayon fabric from Japan in the late 60s and 70s. Keep in mind this was during the early days of synthetic fabrics and traveling to Japan was not all that common. On a business trip, he met some Japanese businessmen who were selling newly designed transistor radios. His contacts wanted to set up an exclusive import agreement for their electronics to North America, but my great-grandfather declined, because how many of these radios could you possibly sell? Turns out that was a short-sighted business decision, because that company was called Sony Electronics. He turned down the exclusive import contract for Sony. On the other side of my family, my Canadian relatives walked away from 100 acres of land in Alberta during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. They decided it was not worth paying the taxes on their land. Turns out that land was right in the heart of the Alberta oil deposits. Also on my mother's side of the family, they used to have a citrus orchard near Los Angeles. They sold it cheap to some land developers. That farm was right at Hollywood and Vine. My family on both sides is bad at seeing long-term investments. I was at a store when Tony Hawk was signing autographs. I was only 10 at the time and was a huge fan. One of his early video games had just come out. The store had a couple TVs on the wall and some video games to play. Being a kid, I waited for one controller to open up and someone leave. A kid ended up leaving and I grabbed the controller and started playing and minding my own business. A couple minutes later the store wanted to grab photos of Tony playing his own video game. He came over and grabbed the second controller and began to play multiplayer with me. Probably played for 10 minutes. The bonus was it was also my 10th birthday, so I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater with Tony Hawk. I saw the former Prime Minister of Poland in his underwear. That's not how the rhyme goes. Once in college I applied for a job at the library help desk. I figured I would help people find books. Didn't give it much more thought than that. During the interview, I aced all of the customer service questions. Then they asked me whether I knew how to defrag a hard drive. Cue alarm bells in my head, but I kept calm outwardly and said no, but you can teach me. I worked in IT for 3 years by accident. They were too nice to fire me. I took my mother for a surprise trip to NYC. She got married to my father there in 1968. The surprise was manufactured by way of telling her we were going to Australia. We live in New Zealand, so a trip to Australia is not a huge deal. It's the type of thing you could do for the weekend. And therefore she packed a bag and brought her passport. We got to the airport and said surprise, we're going to New York, and she cried her eyes out with delight. When we arrived, on our first morning, I said okay, what do you want to do? She said when I was last here, in 1968, the Twin Towers weren't complete. So, I'd like to go to the top of them. Your wish is my command, I said, and off we went to the WTC. That was the afternoon of the 10th of September, 2001. Suffice it to say, there was a particular poignancy when we looked out the window at around 8 AM the next morning. I am allergic to lettuce. Like I carry an EpiPen allergic. I found out my father wasn't my biological father in 10th grade biology class. We were learning about blood types and traits. I raised my hand thinking I was a smartass. Your chart isn't accurate. My dad has AB negative and I'm O positive. My teacher said I think your mom has some explaining to do. And we all chuckled. Turned out, he was not my father. So how did that play out? I came home and laughed about it to my mom. Went to a friend's house and got home around 8 PM. When I got home, my mom was waiting for me. My mom had a stack of pictures on the foot of my bed and told me that's your real father. LOL. So that's how I found out. I was actually okay with it. The person I thought was my father was already kind of a loser deadbeat. Turns out my dad was also a loser deadbeat. No loss, I guess. Would have been awesome if my dad would have turned out to be a decent human being. So, tragic story. Not a happy ending. At least I can look back and laugh. Kind of a funny way to find out. My ex and I were having a huge argument in a hotel parking lot. My friend and ex's dad were there as witnesses. Two big buses pulled up and Justin Bieber got off one of them with a security guard and walked right past us. I was crying and my ex was yelling at me and JB said, and I quote, "Hey, stop that." My ex yelled back at him, "White PPL shouldn't have dreads," and Justin just got onto the other bus, his guard. My friend was cracking up saying, "Was that Justin Bieber?" And sure enough, some people in his entourage or whatever were staying at that hotel and he was in town that night for a concert. TLDR, Justin Bieber told my ex to stop yelling at me, and then my ex yelled at him. In Minnesota in the 70s, I was 16 taking my driver's test. Nervous as hell. A highway patrol officer was the road tester back then, which was even more nerve-wracking. But I thought I was doing pretty good the whole time because I had lots of practice with my parents. Then towards the end of the driving test, I was at a T intersection across from a hospital. I was hesitant to turn onto the road because traffic was busy. I could tell the officer was getting a little impatient, but he was nicely telling me to be a little aggressive. Suddenly at the hospital across from us, someone pushed out a screen from a window on the 3rd floor. Psych ward. A woman jumped out the window onto a garage roof underneath, then jumped to the ground and ran across the road right by us. The officer had me turn around. I was in my mom's car, and chase the girl in the neighborhood. When I would pull up to a stop sign during the chase, he would say, "Go, go, go. Just go through it." After a while, when she started to get away, he gave up with me being the chase driver and told me to head back to the DMV office. I was a complete shaking mess at this point, ready to accept the fact I would not get a license anytime soon. Devastating for a 16-year-old boy. He grabbed my score sheet, said, "You passed," and handed it to me. I got an 88 score. He ran to his HW patrol car and tore off to continue the chase. I go in the office a complete mess. My mom was already really nervous because we were gone so long. Then she saw me looking like a ghost. She said what happened. Told her I passed. Then told her the story on the way home. She wasn't amused and pretty pissed at the highway patrol guy. When I tell the story, I say no BS. Just ask my mom.